Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today we are talking Superman Peace on Earth. So, this one, it's the Christmas comic that came out in January 1999, written by Paul Dini, best known for being one of the head writers of the Batman and Superman animated series from the 90s, and painted by Alex Ross. It's not actually a comic in the strictest sense of the word, but it is a comic because it tells a story in sequential format. Anyway, uh, LaMar, do you remember when this comic came out in '99?
Yeah, and it's funny because when I went into the LCS, I didn't even know it was coming out, right? So I went in there and the manager who's running the place, Kat, I don't know if she watches this channel, but she's great. But she was like, Lamar, you got to check this out. You know about the Alex Ross Superman, the book? And I was like, what book? She's like, the big book. And I was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. So then she goes over and she gives it to me. She's like, here, check this out. And I was like, oh, I don't need to read this. I'm buying it sight unseen, you know? So I checked it out and I thought it was great. And it was like the way it was formatted, like you said, it's not really like formatted like a normal comic book. It's more of like in a narrative form almost because there's no word bubbles really or anything like that when it and stuff like that. So it's formatted a little differently, but it's a really good read. You don't have to like comics or even like Superman to really appreciate it or anything like that. I give it to children a lot, and children love it because it's big and the pictures are big, and that's perfect for them. You know, and the art is just fantastic in it, of course, and it's just a beautiful book like to have on a coffee table or something like that. It's like all of those books like that because there's five of them. There's the
Yeah,
Superman, the Wonder Woman, Batman, and
Captain Marvel
JLA.
and JLA.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, it's called Shazam: The Power of Hope.
Yeah, well, yeah. You know, we sticklers for certain things around here.
Yeah, I just want to correct something before we go on to Paul. This is it's dated January 99 on the publication date, which means it must have come out around November of 98.
98. Okay.
Yeah, which makes sense because it's a Christmas book.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Paul, do you remember this thing coming out?
Not at all, because like 98, I was kind of like, 17, 18, and I hadn't started getting American comics yet. So I was just getting like British reprints from the newsagents. So I wasn't making regular trips to the LCS at that point. So it kind of passed me by at the time, unfortunately, which is a shame because I think I would have loved it because I really liked Alex Ross when I was that age. I was like, Marvels and Kingdom Come had blown me away because I mean you see Alex Ross on everything now,
Yeah, you do.
but yeah, but like I just remember when I first saw Marvels, like it was like wow, like nobody's ever drawn them like this before, so it was and I remember thinking reading Marvel, so I wish they'd do this for DC, and then they kind of did with Kingdom Come, even though it was a different kind of story, and yeah, it was just so exciting to see these superheroes, these larger than life characters rendered in this way. And I still kind of get that kind of thrill from seeing his art, even though I know it's not for everyone. So I would have loved this if I'd known about it in 98, but sadly I didn't. But another reason I wish I'd known about it at the time is that it strikes me that it would be such a good book to give people who don't know Superman, who are curious about Superman. I mean, maybe practically it wouldn't be a good book to give them because it's so big, So have this huge thing to dip your toe into Superman, Maybe that wouldn't be as practical. But the story itself is a really nice introduction to Superman, I think, because the art's so good. And also, a lot of people ask, I think, about Superman. Oh, well, why doesn't he just feed the hungry, feed the starving or overthrow dictators. And this story is one of the best answers to that question, I think.
That's true. I take Alex Ross for granted a lot now. I know that I've been critical of his work on the internet, but I think that's looking back on it, that must have been a reaction to fans like coming in and being like, the whole thing where people are like, "Oh, Alex Ross's art is more than just regular comic book art." Like they're always disparaging the norm when it comes to praising somebody like Alex Ross or Alan Moore. Or and it can get really irksome. But I discovered Alex Ross because of Kingdom Come. Marvel's was completely off my radar, which was really weird because I was buying more Marvel than DC back then. But I discovered him because of Kingdom Come. I finished the whole thing. I loved it, and I went back and read Marvel's. I bought Uncle Sam, which I still think is the best thing he's ever done. And we should talk about that one day, LaMar.
Yeah, no question. Okay.
And if it's ever any question about how much I actually liked Alex Ross's work back then, look at this. Look at this book. It's falling apart. I read this thing to pieces. This is really, this is a mess.
Oh, that's the first one you bought.
Yeah.
Wow.
This is a mess of a book. Like this thing, you're talking about giving this to somebody new. I can't. I can't sell this now either. Yeah, and you mentioned that it's a great answer to why Superman doesn't just solve world hunger. It is. I'm gonna go ahead and say Alex Ross's art. One of the things that I eventually grew out of favor with it was because he was portraying them too realistically, which is actually a testament to his skill. So Superman did not look super imposing, as he would have in the case of, for example, in Justice, where somebody else drew it and Alex Ross painted over it, But then I realized reading through this again that his main influence for Superman was George Reeves, and you can't fault him for that, right? LaMar, you like Alex Ross's work, right?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I like a lot of his techniques that he uses, which we'll talk about when we get into the book. I think it's dope, like the way he uses certain, like the way he blends, like medium. But we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I like his work. I thought it was really interesting when he did the Justice comic, which I recommend that to everybody because it's basically the Super Friends cartoon drawn Alex Ross style.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that it's great. But at first I kind of was like, the first time I saw it, I was like, okay, well, why would somebody want to do that, right? Just with the kind of like use, because it's apparent he uses models and things, like human models. So, and I found out later just how far he goes because he actually has people put on costumes and things. So, at first I was like, why would somebody want to do that? And then I read Kingdom Come, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it. So it was like an immediate thing for me, you know. So I don't rag on him as much as some people do, but more so, it's like always, it's the fans that really, like his fans and stuff, because they kind of reduce um, comic books down, like it was lowbrow until he started doing it, and that irks me, that bothers me.
Yeah, you get it. Yeah. So, and also another thing that we have to mention is this is written by Paul Dini. At the time, he wasn't known for writing comics. He hadn't written a lot of comics. He's known for being one of the head writers, or the head writer, of the Batman animated series and the Superman animated series. So there was a lot of excitement about this because it was Paul Dini working with Alex Ross.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone have any expectations about that based on Paul Dini's name?
Well, the thing about me is that because at the time, I didn't know about it in '98. So in fact, in '98, I probably didn't know who Paul Dini was.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't have had that expectation, I don't think, even if I had known about the comic in '98. But and of course, when I finally did discover Peace on Earth, I'd read I'd read Paul Dini's Detective Comics run, and all the other great stuff he's done in comics. So yeah, because so I think when I picked up Peace on Earth, it was just kind of like, oh yeah, Paul Dini, this will probably be really good.
LaMar, you have Paul Dini expectations here? Because I liked him a lot. It's just that I guess when I first bought it, I was expecting like a super villain to show up.
Mhm. Yeah.
But
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because I didn't have as much expectation on Paul Dini as I did on a cartoon writer, person who writes cartoons, and it's kind of episodic in nature. For someone writing like a one-off story like that, because so you have two different obstacles to overcome. Going from the episode to the one-shot story, and then making the transition from cartoons to comic books, and on both of them, it doesn't always work. So it's not like a given or anything, you know. So when I read the story, though, I'm not going to say I was pleasantly surprised. I was just more like I want to see how he approaches this because yeah, we know he can write, so that was never an issue for me. So, but it's like I just want to see how he approaches this. And at the time, I didn't know about the other stories that were coming. So as far as I knew, it was just this one. So
I
and
did too. Yeah, I
yeah,
this was announced and we didn't really. I think because it succeeded, then we got the other stories.
it was right. Mm-hmm.
We have Batman War on Crime, Shazam Power of Hope. I forget what the Wonder Woman one was called. Spirit of Truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and JLA Liberty and Justice. Yeah, so this one has Superman dealing with world hunger. It's because it's Christmas time. Merry Christmas. And he runs into a woman who's dying, not dying, who's in shock because of hunger. Takes her to a shelter, and then realizes that he hasn't really been doing his part to feed the hungry. Is this a question that we just all ask all the time? Because I think for me, there is an element of why Superman doesn't have, and they always answer this question, like why Superman doesn't just take the fate of the world into his own hands. They always answer this question in the comics with like, oh, because it would corrupt him, he would turn evil. And it's always a cop out for me. I think I like this one better because it just shows him it's fundamentally and structurally impossible. And I don't know if I appreciated that when I was 16, but I think I'm more appreciative of it now because I kind of understand how the world is kind of built better.
Yeah.
You guys think?
It's interesting that you read the comic and you talk about it's structurally impossible to feed everyone who's hungry in the world, even for Superman. And in the comic, it shows that Superman goes to these, it doesn't name the countries, but they're like other countries. They're not the West. And he goes to these countries, and the countries are like, oh, what's this guy all about? He's got an agenda. We don't trust him. Who's this outsider coming in here trying to interfere? And it's very much painted as like other countries doing that.
Yeah.
But this last week, at the time of recording, in the UK, UNICEF, um, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, actually stepped in and offered to start feeding starving children in the UK. And they pledged, what was it, like £25,000 to supply nearly 25,000 breakfasts in a South London borough over the Christmas holidays and February half term. And of course, everyone's saying, like, it's really bad that it's come to this in the UK, which it is. And you've got the Speaker of the House of Commons, Conservative Party MP, Jacob Rees-Mogg, and he actually did exactly what these people did in the comic to Superman. He did it to UNICEF. He actually attacked them, described it as a political stunt, and he said UNICEF were playing politics, and he claimed it should be ashamed of itself. And so imagine that an outside organization steps in to feed the hungry in your country, and you attack them and tell them they should be ashamed of themselves. It's absolutely ridiculous. But it just goes to show how relevant this story is, because it's exactly what happens in this Superman story. This outside power steps in to try and help these countries, and he gets attacked for it by the political leaders. It's just sad that it's happening in the UK.
It's interesting because if you look at the things that aged well from this story, one of them is the fact that the political leaders are in it for themselves. So, and I'm pretty sure one of these is North Korea. It's got the army has the colors of North Korea. So, but the thing that doesn't age well is that the countries they portray as doing that aren't Western countries.
There we go.
Right.
Like, it's interesting, in 98, it was inconceivable that Western leaders would act like that. Like, I mean, maybe they would, but we didn't think that they would at the time,
We were always thinking of the best for it. It's really weird. What do you think of that, LaMar?
Well, I think that's spot on, because especially the part that we're talking about now, about how, we don't think about the West didn't have that reputation then of, and in particular the United States didn't have the reputation that these other countries here would have. And we know now, going back, we know now that there's a lot of things that happen in the United States that some of us had been telling people was going on, but they didn't believe it, like the whole crack epidemic and stuff. And we're not gonna get into all of that, but that wasn't us, right? So, we might have been the ones selling it, but we weren't the ones bringing it in here, and I'll leave that at that. But it's interesting how you figure this is a little over 20 years old, right? 9/11 hadn't happened yet, stuff like that. So the world was a different place.
It's true. We're 2 years away from 9/11 here.
Yeah, that hadn't gone down yet. So the world that we live in today didn't, there was no Patriot Act and none of that stuff. So it was just, you still have like the last remnants of this whole thing about America being what people always thought it would be or what it should be, and the veil hadn't come completely off yet, which is what's interesting about a story like this, is because you could actually take this story now, get rid of all of those other countries and put the West in it, whether it's United States or the UK or Russia or any of these other people, and you could put them in the same spot, and it would still resonate. And so that's one of the things, even though the story stands up because of that, it's a malevolent reason, and we get that, but it still speaks to the power of the story, because you could just kind of pull people out and plug people in, like basketball, when somebody gets tired and you sub them out, put a new guy in. Same thing with stories like this, right? And it still resonates. And that's not the best reason in the world for something to resonate, but hey,
that's so sad.
Yeah.
It's...
yeah, but it speaks to the power of the story.
What a sad turn of events. Why would anybody turn down free help that would benefit it would benefit your constituents? It makes zero sense unless it doesn't benefit you, and you don't care unless it benefits you, right?
Right.
It's insane. It's insane. One of the things that I like about this story is that Clark Kent goes right into the Daily Planet, and he does all of his research in the midst of a Christmas party, which is very Clark Kent of him. And he does all of his research, and I like how he says, in the blink of an eye, I zip through pages of statistics and volumes of reports. The photos, however, I stare at for a long time. And I think maybe that's also reflective of of what's going on today. We got a lot of data on our hands. We've got so much more data than we've ever had on our hands, in one place, easily accessible. But I'm wondering if that means that we're taking things a little too clinically, and we're looking at people as if they were numbers instead of quantifying the cases or the statistics, instead of seeing just people as people.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that because, like you see it in corporations a lot now, where people who get these high level positions in corporations, is you don't really have that thing where you can start at the bottom and work your way up anymore. Because what they do is they hire people who have degrees in finance and things like that. They come in and they just look at things from a numbers perspective. So when you go to them and you're like, hey, listen, this doesn't work long term because this is the effect that it has on the people long term. And so the people that you go to, the only thing they're going to say is, well, the numbers say this, right? And so, it kind of it dehumanizes things in a way, like you said, it's clinical, and that happens a lot when, because we, like you said, we have information like, I'm 41, right? When you go back to the 80s when I was growing up, we didn't have all of this stuff at our fingertips like this. The world was totally different. Like I can go in my pocket and I can pull out all kind of stuff now. But along with that, you have the element of dehumanization, and then you also have this element of people wanting to be the first to know stuff that other people don't know. So and it really, like, and that even further dehumanizes things because now your identity becomes information, you know, and there's no process of sifting through things. And I think when you think about it from this perspective, these governmental bodies, like the ones in the story, they thrive on propaganda and misinformation. That's always been the case. So even though the book itself doesn't necessarily touch on that, that's another element of it that you always get, but usually it's just not considered because, like you said, there's photo dumps literally every day. That's what social media is, right?
Yeah.
A lot of ways it's just information dumps and picture dumps throughout the day, and not everybody knows how to sift through that stuff because most people don't have that savvy, and let's also be real too. Some of us use our phones, instead of looking through information and encyclopedias, we look at naked women on Instagram. Let's just be serious about it, right? That's just the case. That's all we want to do. So there's that element too, and it certainly doesn't help. But yeah, yeah, and it's kind of creepy almost to go back and read this story and kind of put it in a modern context, and then you're like, man, they were so spot on about things, and it's like, wow.
Look, not to interrupt you, but I mean, like, I think when we were growing up, we were thinking if everybody just had access to more information, humanity would be less stupid.
Yeah,
And that's not the case.
near the case.
We've been proven wrong on that.
Yeah.
But also, like, think about it. Social media, the way that information, uh, the way that we're deluged with information on social media, that's probably the way the world seems to Superman
Yeah.
with all of his senses. So I was
Yeah.
saying earlier, like, we're wondering why Superman has never tried to solve world hunger before this. Maybe the answer is the same reason that we don't think of anything until we personally experience it. So he doesn't even think about solving world hunger until he meets that girl who's dying of hunger.
Mhm.
Because there's so much out there, and you have to, yeah, either have to pick your battles, you have to tune stuff out. Social media, the information, the mass information that we consume on social media is probably the closest we'll ever know to what Superman feels like. And
Yeah.
that sucks.
But it's interesting though that I think even though he's Superman, um, he's still experiencing all this in the same way we are. like you say, he doesn't notice the problem because he's just bombarded with all this stuff like we are. And it takes this sort of really stark reminder before his eyes to remind him. And then he skim read, he reads all the information at super speed, but he dwells on the images. And it made me think of Live Aid in the 80s. And it was those images of starving kids in Ethiopia on the news that shocked people into trying to do something about it. But then it also, I think it's really wonderful that Superman experiences, the problem in the same way we experience the problem.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he comes up against the same obstacles that we do as well. Because, of course, the thing about Live Aid was all the money that Bob Geldof and the rest of them raised, a lot of it didn't actually go to the people who needed it.
Yeah.
Because the leaders of that country just nabbed all the money, So, and then Superman faces exactly the same problem when he tries to feed people. So that's when it's sad, but it's also quite beautiful that, this godlike being experiences the problem in the same way we do, and then faces the same problems that we do as well.
It's the same here. So we get hit by what, 4 or 5 typhoons a year? We just had 3 in like the last 4 weeks. And every time we do, there's this call for donations. So we give a bunch of donations and everything. And then a couple of months later, we'll find in some warehouse or something, all of the donations just kind of stacked there still. They don't make it to the people who need them. Or they don't all make it to the people who need them. What does that say about things like political agendas? What do you think? Like, it's only good for show, and then once little cameras aren't rolling, it's just we don't care anymore. And what's it say about us? What's it say about us that we only give and then we forget to follow up to make sure that it goes to the right people, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, it has something to do with the fact that we were just talking about we're just deluged with information. Being able to sift through information is also a skill that people need to have. But so whenever we come up with these resources, you have to do something with them. And one of the things you have to do, you have to create an infrastructure that every step when the stuff changes hands, you have to be able to account to somebody for it, right? And a lot of us just think, hey, we raised all this money and we have all this stuff. Here you go, we've done our job. And then they go off and feel good about themselves and then go do whatever. But it's like, that's not it. This is just where it starts, So you have to be able to hold people accountable all the way up to the top, because those are the people that make the decisions. So once you turn the stuff over, it's like, yo, what are we doing with the stuff? And the fact of the matter is that leaders in countries are not elected because of their morality. That's just a fact of the matter, which is why you have to have these things in place, because you have to be, in order for you to run a country or even a state or a city, for that type of system, or the way we think a lot of it works, for that to work, you would have to have somebody who's dedicated to the people. Like there was a king in Ghana named Tenkaminen, right? And he literally got on his horse every morning and he rode out to where the people lived. And he would sit there and listen to the people's problems and their troubles all day long until till the last person was singing, and he wouldn't leave. And then he would try his best to deal with their problems, right? So, and he didn't send somebody to go do it. He did it himself, because ultimately he was the one who would be responsible for it. So you can't rely on people to do that. Like most people are just not going to do that. So when you have that, you get stuff like this when you don't have that, right? So because there's no world leaders that really have an open door policy with the people that they are supposed to be the servants of. That just doesn't exist anymore.
The concept of infrastructural problems and systemic problems is basically dealt with in this book as well.
Yeah.
So Superman has this idea to just for one day feed the hungry around the world. And he takes his plan to Congress, which is, by the way, that's a great painting.
Yes, yes.
That's a great painting. So he takes his plan to Congress, and there is doubt. So there's warnings of expense and whispers of hidden agendas. Here's the thing: way later in the comic, when his plan eventually fails, Superman will say, "Knowing what I know of human nature, why did I think this would work?" So we know that he fails in this. He does not get all of the food to the people in time. And it would only have been for one day, even if he did. And he says, knowing what I know of human nature, why did I think that this would work? And I think I like that fact because it's so Superman.
Mm.
Yeah.
No matter what happens, no matter what he does know of human nature, he chooses to believe that the people will act in the best interests of other people.
And the other nice thing about the fact that he fails is, again, we fail when we try it as well. And it's like LaMar was saying, that you can't just dump food on people. You've got to set up like an actual infrastructure for this to actually work. And I think that's something Superman kind of learns in this story, because it kind of ends with him telling people how to grow food,
Mm-hmm.
and teaching people rather than just dumping food on them. I think that's a really beautiful ending, because it shows that, like, you know he can't just swoop in from space and save humanity with a gesture, any more than like flipping Bob Geldof can save Ethiopia with Live Aid. There has to be more to it than that. You've got to teach people, you've got to show people, and you've got to build a sort of infrastructure for it all to work. So I think it's lovely that Superman learns that lesson, and it's the same lesson that we need to learn as people as well. It's a really human lesson.
He recalls the words of Jonathan Kent, where he says, "The problem is people. As far back as we go, we've always had problems with sharing. Seems everyone's too busy holding on to what they've got to care how their neighbors are doing," which is not the Jonathan Kent from the Snyder movies. And and then, but the first thing he does, the first thing Superman does on this whole thing, is he dumps a bunch of food in the American Southwest and tells this old Native American man that all he asks for in return is to help him get the food to the people who need it the most. So from the start, he's dependent on the cooperation of the people that he's helping. From the start, even though he recalled the words of Jonathan Kent saying, people have a problem sharing. It's like
Mhm.
Superman just does not want to believe that people have this problem, right? It's
Mm.
just innately against his nature.
Yeah. I think lots of stories have touched on it, that it's like a strength and a weakness at the same time that this character has.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think, LaMar? Yeah.
Well, that's what hope is all about. You see the best in people, and like in Jeff Johns' run on Green Lantern, he dealt with this um, with the whole Blue Lantern and their relationship to the Green Lanterns, because ultimately hope is useless without action, you know, and Superman is basically the embodiment of that. You know, uh, he's very hopeful and he inspires people, but at the same time, his whole thing is about actually getting things done and doing things, you know. And so I think a lot of times people will misuse hope because it makes them feel like, well, this person's out here doing it. They're going to always be here to take care of me, make sure I'm straight. But it doesn't work like that. You have to, you gotta roll your sleeves up, and it's okay to have hope. But if you're not willing to do that, take care of business, you're not going to get anything from it. So Superman as a character, I think more than any character, that dichotomy, he walks that fine line. In this book, you see both the problems when you lean too far in one direction, because he kind of does both in the book, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And like you said, he ultimately fails at his goal, and that's one of the reasons why. From his, from the perspective of him and the things he's doing, even though it's not really a failure because ultimately, people are going to do what they're going to do, and that's outside of his control. You know, so he did what he can do, but there's also a bigger lesson here. You have to be okay with it. If it doesn't work out, you did your best. You have to be okay with it.
What do you guys think of the fact that they never name the countries they're in, even though they show landmarks? I mean,
I
come
suppose it
on.
kind of adds to that sort of so even though we've talked about how aspects of the book have dated, it kind of adds to the whole kind of timeless quality of the book, even down to at the start, something I quite like. You don't actually see the design of the rocket that leaves Krypton.
Mhm.
So it could be like you read this and you don't really know if it's from 98 or not, because yeah, the countries aren't named. It doesn't refer explicitly to any sort of political status quo. And it doesn't even refer to any particular status quo in the Superman comics. So I quite like that about it, that, the lack of countries named adds to the timeless quality of it.
Just to give you just from that origin, I love how he says, as I grew older, I discovered I could defy gravity. Not fly, not fly, not jump, defy gravity. That's a nice way of encapsulating the whole thing.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yes. Yeah, you were gonna say, Paul?
Oh, well, it's just that it just occurred to me, I was saying earlier on about this whole thing about like, you know, Superman learns that, it's best to teach people at the end as opposed to like do it for them. And it just made me think about how like people use Superman as this sort of Christ analogy, but they kind of get it wrong, I think. Because whenever you see Superman used as a Christ analogy, there we go. It's always like, Superman doing this, or Superman dying for our sins, or save us, Superman. And that's kind of the role Superman takes on at the start of this story. I'm going to save everyone. But if he is like Jesus, it's because he's a teacher like Jesus. I think Jesus doing the Sermon on the Mount has more is more accurately like Superman than Jesus on the cross. And I think
Yeah.
people go for Jesus on the cross when they want to portray Superman as Jesus, and I think that's the wrong comparison with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that whole kind of the whole thing, him being a teacher and leading by example as well, it kind of ties in with the whole sort of Moses analogy as well, I guess, as well.
And the funny thing is, funny you mentioned that because people tend to forget sometimes, like what you were talking about the imagery. If you actually read the story, Jesus was a revolutionary. So he was the one who went into the temple and flipped the table over because they were ripping the people off, right?
Yeah.
And so the whole reason he got crucified is because he took on the state. So and I think sometimes people forget about that because Jesus was all about action.
Did
Even
you just say Jesus did property damage when he disagreed with the government?
Bigly, yeah, he went in there and tore the
Big,
place.
bigly, huge, huge.
What about these business owners trying to make a living in the temple, and Jesus just comes in and,
Came in and tossed the place like a Caesar salad. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what's in the book. That's what you got to go by. So, like you said, sometimes people like to take the guy on the cross and they like to take that part and put it up, but they don't really think about this guy who was doing these things, and that the whole reason why he ended up on the cross is because he was causing trouble for the state. And so he also told his people that you are gods. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you have the power to do this stuff,
Mhm.
right? So it's not just about me. You have the power to do it. So I think that that's a very important part of the message in the stories. in the New Testament that I think when you put it on Superman, it works perfectly. But like you said, people conveniently forget it. You know.
I mean, like, we're gonna get heavy here, but first of all, in keeping with the season, I just want to point out Jesus was a refugee, or more to the point, Mary and Joseph were refugees.
Right. Yeah.
So we're getting a little heavy here, and I'm perfectly fine with that. But it does point to the dichotomy, and it's even so in this book with Superman. We have a dichotomy of people who want to be saved versus people who realize that they have the power to save themselves, or it can at least contribute to saving themselves, right?
Yeah.
It's just the fact of, going into action. So there is a big difference between expecting that Superman is going to show up and feed you every day for the rest of your life versus learning how to make food.
Right.
And I mean, granted, that's overlooking certain things like systemic oppression from these countries and whatnot, but it's there. The dichotomy is there.
Mhm.
And I think that's also applicable to religion. Just
Yeah.
keep on expecting it to solve all our problems for us right away.
Yeah.
Well, it's a big thing in America, from what I can see. Recently more than ever is this whole idea of, like, televangelists saying, like, Jesus wants you to be rich. If you pray, he'll give you money, and if you give us money, they'll give you even more money. And yeah, so it's interesting that, like, Superman and Jesus get misunderstood in similar ways. They're gonna come and help save you and help all your problems.
Mhm.
Yeah, people really want Superman to be Jesus in certain ways, but then just don't really care about the other ways. You're right.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Superman basically here, what ends up happening is that he goes further and further east. And the further and further east he goes, the worse it gets for him. What do you guys think of that? Because now I would say he doesn't need to go that far east.
No, I agree. Yeah, he'd just need to come to blimmin' London, wouldn't he? And Jacob Rees-Mogg would be having a go at him.
You can hit the UK and just shut it down right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something that I think is uh part that I didn't want that we can address now that we're talking about this is that when he declares that he's doing this thing, as soon as it like seals that it's not going to work, the news broadcasters and stuff, they immediately go on the air to smear this dude and talk about how his plan failed and all this kind of stuff, which is also typical, right?
Yeah.
Um, you got to be the person that puts it out there first and stuff with no care to any of the other stuff. But yeah, I do think it's interesting that it seems to intensify the further to the east he goes, and then you even have like the scene where the guy comes out with the army. He basically tells him, "Hey, listen, you can't be here every day. So uh, you won today, but we be back tomorrow. So you come and bring some more stuff back. We gonna keep doing this."
Yeah, so they basically say, Superman, you gotta leave the food here with us.
Yeah.
With us. So it's not gonna get to the people. So what ends up happening is Superman throws the food over to the people, and then the soldiers fire at the people. Superman blocks it, and then the guy says, "You can't come here every day. You can't do this every day. You keep on coming. You keep on doing this. We're gonna do it." So he has no choice but to leave the food behind. So even there, you've got Superman in a standstill with with a world dictator,
Yeah.
and that goes to show the systemic flaws in just the flaws in the whole infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Mm. It just a bit of a tangent, but I just remembered there's. Have you guys ever read Superman Earth One
Mhm.
by your favorite writer, JMS?
You know the answer to this.
LaMar, is it volume 2 where Superman has a similar standoff with a dictator?
I'll read it if you pick it for one of these videos, though.
It might be an interesting one to do, actually.
Yeah, I'll
But
read it if you pick it.
Yeah. I think
he
that
has
was
a
too, though. I think you know.
and the way he solves that in Superman Earth One Volume 2, I think it's Volume 2. He just gives the people all the guns and leaves them to it.
Yeah,
which um which I enjoyed seeing that explored in a sort of out of continuity story. But it's not very Superman, is it?
like you said, is as long as nobody tries to take it and bring it into continuity, it's okay.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's funny because Wonder Woman does that in New Frontier.
Yeah,
And
that's
Same.
it.
Superman gets on her case for it.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a tangent, but I thought I'd bring it up just because it is interesting to see how other writers have tackled this idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, we should do Superman Earth One, I think.
Go ahead, pick it for your next one. But Lamar's got the next pick for the next
Yeah.
book anyway.
We'll do it at some point.
Lamar, I gotta ask you, man. So the problems that Superman faces here are all systemic, political, all have to do with their, with the way that those countries are. But when he gets to Africa, his problem is a stampede of animals.
Yeah.
What's up with that? What do you what do you think of that?
You know, it's funny because there's a lot of different ways you could take that, I guess. But one thing I do want to say is that Africa has a unique problem as a continent because in other places you're talking about countries, but when you're talking about Africa, you're talking about a persistent problem throughout the continent. And so when you have politicians and stuff, when they start, you have people now calling places in Africa, S holes and all this other kind of stuff. And this is how it speaks to the ignorance of people because when you go back to the 1870s, there was something called the Berlin Conference, right? And so basically, all of Europe got together in one room and they basically were like, they put a map of Africa on the table and they basically were like, okay, I'm going to take this part. You take that part. You take this part. You take this part. They went all over the continent doing that, right? And so this is how Africa ended up being mass looted by Europe, right? So, and it had gone on before that because we know that like the rulership in the UK, their whole empire is built upon natural resources that were taken from Africa, right? So, when you think about it from that perspective, the colonization like started like religiously, right? But then also they followed it up with this kind of stuff. So, and now we see China starting to do it now. So these problems, it's not just like it happens once and then the people step away, right? You have to perpetuate it. Once you do it, you have to keep it going. So this is what happens. So now, like you have these people, like you think about, like what we talking about Live Aid. And y'all remember in the '80s, whenever you see somebody in Africa doing something, it was always like a kid with a bloated belly and an eye and a fly on their eyeball, that kind of stuff, right? So
Yeah.
people think that when you go to Africa, that's all you see.
I mean, look, I'll just tell you this. I'm very thin. So when I was a kid, one of the insults thrown my way was Ethiopian.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's racist as hell, guys. Don't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, please don't do that. Yeah, don't do that.
Yeah.
And so and the reason why these you see this kind of imagery because first of all these people are trying to get your money, and number two, it puts out a certain thing where you have these people in Africa who can't help themselves, but they never tell you why. Because even in these countries that have African rulership, a lot of the times they're puppet dictators, right? So you have these other countries who install these people into these places, and they do the bidding of whatever their colonizing country is. So, like along Western Africa,
Mm.
there's lots of places who, the lingua franca is like French or Arabic, you know, and then like the indigenous languages like Wolof, for example, are spoken in the home but not necessarily taught in school. So when you go to school, you have to learn in French and all this other kind of stuff. Like that's what you deal with, and it just depends on what side of the continent you're on. But when it comes to Superman and encountering the animals and stuff, when he goes to Africa, and the pages are beautiful, and
Oh, they're beautiful pages.
yeah, they're beautiful. And he comes and he drops the food off and all of that, and the people are out there, but then the animals come, you know, and so in a lot of these places, that the place has been looted of the natural resources, which is what I kind of think that Alex Ross and Paul Dini were trying to get at. The natural resources were looted, so that means the animals don't have resources either, you know. And so when the food gets dropped, they come running towards the food. And so if you're a lion, for example, and you hunt zebras and you see the zebras running in a direction, you're gonna follow them because you're going with the food. That's just how it works. You know, and
That's a
so
good point.
yeah, I think that's what they were trying to communicate. And that's the way I took it. And I also enjoyed the scene where Superman is like corralling the animals and stuff, and he knows that they can't really hurt him, so he's kind of having fun, like hugging up on a lion and stuff. You know what I mean? Like I
He's
thought that was
smiling. He's smiling when he does it.
yeah, I
Yeah.
thought that was kind of cool. Because anybody else they'd be dead. But I just thought that was dope. But yeah, I always took it that that's what was happening. That's
Superman wrestling a rhino and a lion and an elephant all in one page. That's great stuff.
Yeah, it's really cool.
yeah, yeah.
And he's smiling too. That just does it for me. Yeah, you've convinced me. At first I thought it was a cop out. I'm like, why is everything political? And then except for Africa, that makes no sense to me. But you've convinced me. Yeah, the animals would go. And to that, there is another country where it's the rats. The rats are the ones that come
Yeah. Mhm.
to the food. And I think it's an interesting page because he comes over and it's so quiet and everybody's in their homes,
Mhm.
and they're all skeptical about what he might bring or what he's there for. And I think it's interesting because he's Superman, right? So you think that for these countries, you really can see what the media, what their media is feeding them. In this
Yeah.
case, it's a skepticism of Superman.
Yeah. Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, it's probably one of the saddest bits that sort of people who are so kind of broken that they don't believe they've been saved, and the rats just eat the food. That's really sad. That is.
Mhm.
But again, you wonder how far away would it be today? It's very much a far away, nameless country, isn't it? In peace on
Mhm.
earth. But
Yeah.
yeah,
He
Mhm.
showed up in a, let's just say if he endorsed a particular presidential candidate and he showed up in a state that did not vote for that particular presidential candidate. Isn't even
yeah,
Yeah.
ironically might be his own state,
Yeah.
Mm,
Mhm. Yeah.
right?
yeah, yeah.
That's that's something to think about.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into that now, but it is really weird how Superman comes from a state that would probably support somebody, and his values are always, they're always talking about how they're from his salt of the earth parents. But that particular state he's from, Kansas, would probably not support the politicians that he would endorse, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think his parents and stuff, in a political sense, when you look at it from that perspective, his parents would be outliers where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd like to think so. Yeah, Paul.
But it's interesting that like Trump supporters do use that they do associate with Superman weirdly, and that Trump photoshopped to look like Superman is quite a common thing on the internet.
Mhm.
These are people who clearly have not read Superman comics.
Well, yeah.
I'm sorry.
We actually talked about that in the group one time, and I brought the point up that the reason why that is probably is because they see Superman as this power fantasy, and he basically looks like them. And because he has this power, he can kind of take what he wants. Nobody can stop him. So for them, it's not so much about the moral thing. It's more so about how I have the power to do what I want to do, and you can't do anything about it. You know,
Mm.
and so and when you take that, and because like Paulie said, they do it with Captain America too.
You do it with
So
Cap too, yeah.
yeah. So you have those power fantasies at play, and it's like when I really get my stuff going, you can't stop me from doing what I want to do because I'm wrapped in this flag. So it's my right to do this, right? So it's all about this jingoism, if you want to call it that. More so than it is even like patriotism or something like that. But it's interesting how people have these inflated senses of self that have no bearing in reality whatsoever, because these people, the people that you think you are would hit you in the mouth for behaving the way you're behaving, right? So it's interesting seeing how people have these ideologies about themselves that have no bearing in their day-to-day reality and worldview, you know.
It's interesting. It's just ridiculous.
Something I find interesting about stories like this as well, when I read Superman Peace on Earth, and then stories like Why Must There Be a Superman, and even Superman Earth One, these stories that tackle these big questions in different ways. I always think of the DVD commentary for Superman the movie by Richard Donner, and I think it's Tom Mankiewicz, the screenwriter, and they're talking about Superman 4 because they're talking about how much they admire Christopher Reeve and how great he is. And then they talk about Superman 4 and how having Superman trying to get rid of all the nuclear bombs on Earth was a bad idea. Even though Christopher Reeve was great, that was a bad idea on his part. And the reason they gave for that is because, you can't tell those stories with Superman. And it's interesting that they thought that, because clearly you can, because we're talking about one right now, and loads of stories have been written tackling this. So I always find that quite interesting and quite satisfying when I read stories like this, because I think, Richard Donner, you were wrong. Yeah.
Still love you though.
Still love him. Yeah, he still made the greatest film of all time, obviously.
No bias.
Yeah.
Superman's last successful mission in delivering the food here. It's interesting because you got the people clawing at him. It's kind of a callback to John Byrne's Man of Steel #1. They all wanted a piece of me. They're all just clawing at him, but then he leaves. He spirals his way outside of that mob, and turns out they were going after the food. So that's there's a couple of layers there for me. The first one is Superman, when he first showed up, was mobbed. So why would he think that his first appearance in any of these other countries would be any different? One. And the other one is, wow, they were after the food. They weren't after Superman. So the sight of a flying man to them, a flying man in this costume, is less important. The sight of food is more unbelievable. that's such a great way to encapsulate how big the problem is.
Yeah. hmm Yeah. And I'm going to tell you something too about, which is what I thought about when I saw this particular scene. You know, one of the reasons why, like, especially like in the interior of Africa, Southern Africa, one of the ways in which these places were colonized so easily is because in Africa, white is associated with spiritual ascension and purity. So when they saw the Europeans coming, there were some people who thought that these Europeans were their ancestors coming back, right? So they were more inclined to listen to them. But and also you go into certain places, you know, that like especially in the Congo, and you know, all over Africa, there's this rich tradition with these ceremonial masks for different ceremonies and stuff. And what you see is whenever people would come in and they would talk to the people and stuff. Like, of course, you know, if you come from America, for example, and you like Elvis Presley, you're gonna bring like your radio and your records, and you're gonna be listening to your records, right? So of course these people come over and they're wanting to know what you're listening to, and you show them the records and stuff, and then the next thing you know, they're listening to the music, and obviously there's something in the music that they identify with because we know that Elvis stole a lot of his stuff from black artists.
Yes,
So
he
there's
did.
something there that resonates with them, even if they don't know what it is. And then the next thing you know, when they're doing their ceremonies and they're doing their dances and stuff, somebody comes out and they've carved a wooden mask and it has Elvis Presley's face on it. You see that kind of stuff, right? And then there's also things where somebody was reading like a Superman comic and they're talking to the indigenous people and they're like, hey, what is this? And they tell them about Superman. They're like, he's a super strong guy. He always does what's right and he never loses a fight, you know? And the next thing you know, when they're doing their rituals and stuff and they're doing their dances, like the warriors will come out and they have Superman masks that they carve and put on and they wear them. You know what I mean? Like you see that kind of stuff. Um, and so just with something like this, that's what it made me think about and how, you know, but like you said, Superman is more believable to them than somebody actually having a lot of food, right? And so that's conveyed really, really well here with Superman having to do his spin and go under the ground bit that he does quite a bit. And so just having to, you know, it's just like the way that they executed this. Going back to what I was saying about how I didn't know how Paul Dini was going to take to the medium, stuff like this, man, he knocked it out of the park. You know, he really, really did. Because there's a lot of room for the stuff to go wrong. You know,
Yeah.
and he managed to deal with it beautifully.
Uh, and then the next scene is basically when the grain gets poisoned. People, you know, this one country blows it out of his hands,
Yeah.
making his mission end in failure. And I think it was important that it ended in failure, even if, let's look at it this way: if there's an alternate reality where Paul Dini and Alex Ross decided to end this in him actually succeeding in feeding everyone and delivering it to all the countries, so what? It would still be the same lesson the next day.
Yeah.
The next day, they're hungry again, right? I think it's more important that he fails in this particular story. What do you think? Like, would it have made a difference?
I think so. I think if Superman is going to be a morally good character, like a worthwhile character, set with a positive message, which we all want him to be, I think he has to fail at stuff like this, because the message from a character like Superman has to be ultimately he can't solve all your problems. He's not coming to save you, which is seems paradoxical, but if the ultimate message of a character like Superman is someone who's going to come from the sky and save you, that's a really bad message, you know.
I don't think I'd want to read that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people think Superman is. You know, I've got a friend who always sort of criticizes the concept of superheroes as being like Nietzschean and all that. And I think that's such a misunderstanding of a character like Superman, because that's what he could be about, but that's not what he's about. Ultimately, yeah, and this story shows it more than a lot of other stories. Superman's really human. and Superman represents what we can do if we want to. And that's and like said at the start of this, you know, everything he reacts to and everything he does in this story, he reacts like a human, and he does it like a human. Even if he is wrestling rhinos along the way, he's still acting like very, very human all the way through this story. And ultimately, it's a human mistake that he makes to think he can solve problems in this way.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important to have that aspect of the character present. Otherwise, he just becomes a very superficial, stupid character, which a lot of people think he is, which he isn't. He's great.
Yeah, my whole thing with Superman has always been more that I find him more aspirational. He's the kind of character that I would like to be. It's not so much that I relate to him or that I want him to exist. It's more like he provides a model for the kind of person that, I think I would like to be.
Absolutely. Yeah. The best of us kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Our best aspects, or what should be our best aspects. Yeah.
LaMar?
Yeah, I think that ultimately for the story to work, I think he has to fail. I think because if we have a story where Superman ultimately like he succeeds in his mission, uh, it changes the character in a way that it lessens the character. Because what happens is basically, like you said, he basically would have to. So when the guy says, "Hey, listen, we coming back tomorrow," Superman would basically have to say, "Oh, that's great. I'll meet you here about 10:30 because I'll be back too." Right? He would literally have to do that every single day. So when he would have to retire from crime fighting, so like he wouldn't be able to stop alien invasions anymore, or anything like that. He would have to let him know, "Hey, Superman, we got these guys coming and they say they're gonna blow us all off the map. We need you." He'd be like, "Nah, I don't do that no more, man. I got to move this grain over here." You know, you know what I mean? There's no more Superman comics, right? So functionally, it doesn't make sense, for him to kind of come out on top on this one. And in a way, from a moral perspective, he actually does come out on top because he realizes that this is not something that one person can do, even if it's him. And so he kind of comes to grips with it and deals with it, right? Because the only other option would just be to go 100% rogue and just take the whole world over, right? That's the only other option. And so once again, Superman comics are over with. So there's no real way to really address it like that. So he has to, not succeed in his mission because and it makes him a better character, like not succeeding in this case. It basically makes him and it fixes what Paulie was talking about how the cynics and things approach Superman and stuff. It's like, you know, this is a story that lets you know that this is not what Superman is. So, you always have people that say Superman is boring or he's not easy to relate to. I mean, man, listen, he grew up on a farm and he loves his mama. I mean, I can relate to that. I grew up in a small town in southeastern North Carolina. That's easy. So and he has all these different powers and stuff. Like, who wouldn't want to fly around the world and be out in space and stuff like that? Like, you could relate to it if you wanted to.
With your dog.
With his dog.
With your dog, yeah.
So, like, you could relate to it if you wanted to, but that's just people just taking pot shots and talking points and stuff. That's all. And almost always it's Batman fans. You know what I mean? But we're not gonna get into that, right?
I can't believe somebody took a shot at Batman. It wasn't me.
I mean, it's the truth, man. Some of these people are insufferable. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, and so but yeah, I think he has to lose this one, man, or else there's no real reason to tell the story, I think.
Yeah. In the end, what he learns is that Clark Kent is going to do more good than Superman in this case because it's the dissemination of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the nitpicks I have in this book is that Clark Kent interviews Superman when he fails in his mission. It should be Lois Lane.
I agree.
I don't know where she is or any other character is in this book. Where are they? Seriously, where are they? It's weird. But other than that, the last page where he goes to where does he go to? He goes to a small farm, and then he teaches the kids how to, how to plant stuff. It's a callback to the first scene where his dad is teaching him how to plant stuff. And I love that line. He says, "Not every seed will make it, but I tell them not every seed will make it, but all of them deserve the chance to grow." And it's true of plants. It's true of people. I love that. Closing thoughts on Superman Peace on Earth, guys. I've got one. Alex Ross draws so photorealistically that if he did a whole series that was just the Daily Planet, I would buy it.
No question. No question.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I get on his stuff for making superheroes too realistic. Like the fantasy kind of goes away the more you read his stuff, for me at least. But like, that's exactly it. As a testament to his skill. If he did a Daily Planet series, I would totally buy it. So, closing thoughts on Superman Peace on Earth?
I think if you think Superman is one way, you should read this story, and maybe it'll make you think, oh, he's not that way. Maybe this story will change your mind about Superman, if any story will. And even if it doesn't change your mind, it's got a picture of Superman hugging a lion and wrestling a rhino. So that's good. So, so it's win-win, really, this story, however you look at it.
LaMar?
Yeah. Unfortunately, this story has aged very well for all the wrong reasons, but it's definitely worth a read. I strongly suggest that you check it out. And a lot of the images here, the imagery here is fantastic.
Yeah.
One mention is the one where Superman's flying in space and he's looking down at the Earth, and it has the picture of the people, all the people of Earth, in their heads and close-ups and stuff like that. That's a beautiful image. Of course, it's a callback to the ending of all the Superman movies, where Superman's out in space and he kind of smiles and flies off or whatever. But this is definitely a book you should check out. And it obviously we're talking about it 20 years later, so it rewards repeated reads. I know a lot of times I always catch something that I didn't see before. I did that reading it for this because I always read stuff over. Definitely check it out, man. Doesn't matter if you're a fan of Superman or not. Just check it out. This is a dope book.
I've got a closing request from one of you.
Okay.
That page you just mentioned, the double page spread. Hey, Paul, would you mind reading that out loud?
Yeah, right. Let me try and find it.
Make some of our viewers very happy. This one's for you, Lamar's friends.
Here we go. The welfare of Earth and all its people will always be my primary concern. But if there is a solution to the problem of hunger, it must be one that comes from the compassionate heart of man and extends outwards towards his fellow man. There's an old saying, give a man a fish and eats for a day. Teach him to fish and eat for a lifetime. That simple message asks humankind to nurture with knowledge, to reach out to those in need and inspire others to do the same. That is life's greatest necessity and its most precious gift. I ask everyone to share what they have with those who need it, their knowledge, their time, their generosity, especially with the young, for on them rests our future and all hope of a true peace on earth.
Merry Christmas, everyone.